What you are about to witness is the autopsy of a financial assassination. We are going to dissect the moment the global financial order died, not with a bang, but with a single, decisive, swift message. For decades, you were told a story, a comfortable fairy tale about the unshakable US dollar. You were told it was the bedrock of the world, as permanent as the mountains. That story was a lie. And in February 2022, that lie was exposed in a way that can never be hidden again. By the end of this series, you will see the ghost that now haunts every Treasury Department from Beijing to Brasilia. And more importantly, you will understand exactly how to position yourself in the ruins of the old world to not just survive, but to thrive. This isn't just history, it's a survival guide. Let's travel back in time. It's July 1944. The world is on fire. World War II is raging, and in a quiet, misty hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, a group of men in suits are deciding the fate of the next century. They're building a new financial system from the ashes of war, and they crown a new king, the US dollar. The deal was simple. The world would peg its currencies to the dollar, and the dollar, in turn, would be pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. It was a system built on a promise, American promise. This was the birth of what a French minister would later, with venomous accuracy, call the exorbitant privilege. The privilege to print the world's reserve currency, to run massive deficits, to force everyone to use your financial system because they had no other choice. It was the greatest financial trap ever laid, and for nearly 80 years, the world walked right into it. But every empire becomes a prisoner of its own power. Imagine you are a young, brilliant economist in Brazil in the 1990s. Your country is wrestling with hyperinflation. The currency in your pocket becomes worthless by the week. You see your parents' life savings evaporate. The trauma is seared into your memory. What is the solution? You dollarize. You beg for dollar-denominated loans from the IMF. You hold US Treasury bonds as the ultimate safe asset. You are taught, you believe, that the greenback is salvation. This was the psychological cage. The trauma of currency collapse in dozens of nations made the dollar seem not like a choice, but a divine mandate. Your entire financial identity was built around your relationship with the US dollar. It was the sun around which every economic planet orbited. And at the center of this solar system was a Belgian cooperative you'd probably never heard of, SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It wasn't a bank. It didn't hold any money. It was simply the messaging system, the central ledger. Think of it as the central nervous system of global finance. Every day, millions of messages zipped through its servers. Transfer $100 million from Deutsche Bank to Citibank. Pay for 10 million barrels of Saudi oil. It was neutral, technical, boring. But herein lies the darkest secret of modern power. Control the messaging system and you control the money. The US Treasury, through a web of correspondence and regulations, held its finger on the SWIFT switch. They could watch every transaction, and crucially, they could cut anyone off. For years, this was a whispered threat used against pariah states like Iran and North Korea. The world tut-tutted, but didn't really care. They were the bad guys, after all. The system worked.
But then came 2014. Russia annexes Crimea. The whispers in Washington and Brussels begin. We should cut them off from SWIFT. The threat is made public. And in the Kremlin, a cold shiver runs down the spine of Vladimir Putin. For the first time, a major G20 economy, a nuclear power, was being threatened with financial annihilation. The Russians were given a stay of execution, but the lesson was learned. The trap had been shown to them. The weapon existed, and it had their name on it. They now knew, with chilling certainty, that their access to the global financial bloodstream could be severed with a pen stroke in Brussels. So they began to prepare. Quietly, methodically, they started building an escape route. They developed their own financial messaging system, the SPFS. They stockpiled gold. They de-dollarized their reserves. They were like prisoners slowly digging a tunnel, knowing the warden could throw them in solitary confinement at any moment. The world, however, was asleep. We were living in the joy and complacency of the 2010s. The stock market only went up. Cryptocurrencies were a fun, speculative game. The dollar was king. We felt secure, reliable in the knowledge that the system was permanent. But that security was an illusion, a trauma-induced trance. We were like the citizens of Pompeii, ignoring the tremors because Vesuvius had been silent for so long. The stage was set for a catastrophe. All that was needed was a spark. That spark came on February 24, 2022. Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border. The world erupted in outrage, and in the halls of Western power, a decision was made. The nuclear option of finance was no longer just a threat. It was time to push the button. On February 26th, a joint statement from the European Commission, France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States declared that select Russian banks would be removed from the SWIFT system. The headline screamed, "The West deploys the nuclear weapon of finance." Commentators cheered. Justice, they said, was being served. The Russian economy would be strangled. The ruble would collapse. It was a moment of righteous shock for the world and seemingly a masterstroke. But let me tell you a story about a trap within a trap. In 1971, President Nixon made a fateful decision. He severed the dollar's last link to gold. The Bretton Woods system was dead. The world panicked. What would back the dollar now? The then Secretary of the Treasury, John Connolly, flew to a meeting of terrified European finance ministers, and he told them, with what can only be described as arrogant brilliance, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." The world had no alternative. They were trapped. They had to accept the new, pure fiat dollar because the entire architecture of global trade was built on it. The trauma of collapse was greater than the fear of dependence. This was the original sin. The moment the dollar became a faith-based currency backed by nothing but US military power and systemic inertia.
Now, fast forward to that day in February 2022, when the SWIFT decision was announced, in trading desks in London, in central banks in Beijing, in finance ministries in New Delhi, and in the oil markets of Riyadh, a different kind of shock occurred. It wasn't the shock of justice being served. It was the shock of a fundamental truth being revealed. The neutrality of the global financial system was a myth. The US and its allies had just weaponized the plumbing of the global economy in a hot war against a peer-level adversary. The message was not lost on the rest of the world. It was a message of terrifying clarity. You are next. If you ever step out of line, if your geopolitical interests ever diverge from Washington's, this could be you. Your economy could be turned off like a light switch. The initial joy and shock in the West was a pyre that burned the very foundation of the dollar's empire. It was the moment the warden, in a fit of rage, showed every prisoner in the yard that he could and would lock them all away. And in that moment, every other nation on earth, every rival, every neutral party, every so-called friend, started looking at that tunnel the Russians had been digging and thought, "I need one of those." The Great Escape had begun. The exorbitant privilege had just become an exorbitant burden. But the collapse of the dollar's hegemony wasn't just a political decision. It was ignited by a technological revolution that had been waiting in the wings for its moment. Now, we will descend into the digital underworld. We will uncover how a cryptic white paper published by a mysterious entity named Satoshi Nakamoto provided the blueprint for the escape. And we will expose the secret, desperate alliances being formed between ancient empires and 21st century code. Alliances that are constructing a new financial system in the shadows, one that has no place for the US dollar. The ghost in the machine is awake, and it is rewriting the rules of money itself. The decision to cut Russia from SWIFT was a quake that shook the world, but the true avalanche was just beginning. You see, the architects of the old order made a fatal miscalculation. They believed the world had no alternative. They were like the master of a grand, singular castle, who, upon displeasing a guest, assumed the guest would simply freeze in the wilderness. They never imagined the guest had already been secretly building a new city right outside their walls, and the blueprint for that city was published at the precise moment of the last great financial crisis, born from a trauma that foreshadowed everything to come. Let's go back to 2008. The global financial system is having a seizure. Lehman Brothers collapses. The housing market implodes. You watch on the news as ordinary people are thrown out of their homes, their life savings vaporized by a cabal of bankers playing with derivatives they didn't understand. The trust in the entire system, in the banks, in the regulators, in the dollar itself, shatters. It was a trauma of betrayal. And in the midst of this chaos, on October 31, 2008, a cryptic message is posted on an obscure cryptography forum. It's from someone calling themselves Satoshi Nakamoto. The subject line, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The document was a declaration of war. It proposed a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. Not trust in banks, not trust in governments, not trust in the US Treasury. It was a system built on code, on mathematics, on a decentralized ledger called the blockchain that no single entity could control or shut down. At the time, it was dismissed as a fantasy for anarchists and computer geeks. But it was the seed. It was the first viable escape pod from the dying star of centralized finance. For years, this alternative system grew in the shadows. It was volatile, chaotic, and misunderstood. The old guard laughed at it. Jamie Dimon called Bitcoin a fraud, but they were missing the point. It wasn't about the price of a single Bitcoin, it was about the protocol. It was about the idea. The idea that value could be transmitted across the planet instantly, without asking for permission from a bank, without being monitored by SWIFT, without being frozen by the US Office of Foreign Assets Control. This was the ghost in the machine, and it was waiting for its moment. That moment arrived on February 26, 2022. As the SWIFT sanctions hit, a frantic global scramble began. But it wasn't just a political scramble, it was a technological and financial one. Russian oligarchs, suddenly unable to move billions through traditional channels, turned to the only system that was still open, the blockchain. Stories emerged of assets being converted into crypto, of wallets being funded, of a shadowy multi-billion-dollar exodus happening in real time right under the noses of the very governments trying to enforce a financial blockade. It was a scene straight out of a cyberpunk thriller. A sanctioned Russian oil company could now, in theory, sell a cargo of oil to a trading firm in the UAE and receive payment in a stablecoin, a digital token pegged to the dollar but transmitted on a neutral, uncontrollable network. The sanction was rendered a digital ghost swinging its sword through empty air. This was the shock. The weapon they thought was ultimate had just been neutralized by a technology they had spent years mocking. But the real revolution wasn't just in the dark corners of the crypto world. It was in the brightly lit halls of central banks. In Beijing, the reaction to the SWIFT move was not just political concern, it was a five-alarm fire. The Chinese Communist Party had been terrified of this exact scenario for years. Their own historical trauma was the century of humiliation, where foreign powers dictated terms to a weak China. They saw the US financial power as a direct threat to their sovereignty. And so, they had been preparing their own digital fortress, the digital yuan. This wasn't a cryptocurrency in the Bitcoin sense. It was a centralized, government-controlled digital currency. But its power was profound. It allowed for the direct peer-to-peer settlement of international transactions, completely bypassing the SWIFT system and the dollar clearing network. Imagine a future where Saudi Arabia sells oil to China, Instead of a complex dance through New York banks and SWIFT signals, the payment is made instantly from the People's Bank of China to the Saudi Central Bank in a digital currency that they control. The dollar is cut out of the picture entirely. This is not a speculative fantasy. It is happening right now. China has already conducted billions of dollars in cross-border transactions using its digital currency in pilot programs with partners across Asia and the Middle East. They are building a new Silk Road, not of stone and camel trails, but of bytes and financial protocols. And they are not alone. Over 130 countries, representing 98% of global GDP, are currently exploring central bank digital currencies. Each one is a potential exit ramp from the dollar highway. The shock of 2022 didn't just create a desire for an alternative, it provided the political cover to build it openly. The great fragmentation, the splinter net of finance, is already under construction. So where does this leave you? The emotional journey from the joy of a seemingly stable system through the shock of its weaponization to the cold, hard reliability of mathematical code brings us to the final, crucial emotion, inspiration. Because in the collapse of the old lies the seed of the new. You are not a passive observer in this story. You are living through the greatest transfer of financial power in a century. The trauma of the past, the 2008 crisis, the weaponization of SWIFT has shattered the old illusions. The curiosity about what comes next is the most valuable asset you can possess. The future will not be a simple binary of dollar dies, Bitcoin wins. It will be a messy, multipolar world of digital currencies, both public and private. The US dollar will not disappear, but its exorbitant privilege, its stranglehold on global trade, is ending. It will become one currency among many in a new competitive landscape. This is not a cause for despair, but for empowerment. For the first time in generations, individuals have the tools to opt out of a system they no longer trust. You can hold a portion of your wealth in a digital bearer asset that no government can inflate away at a whim. You can transact globally without begging for permission. You can become your own central bank. This is not a prophecy of doom. It is the cold, sober acceptance of reality. The comfortable fairy tale is over. The financial historian looks at these cycles and sees the inevitable decline of empire. But the pragmatist sees unparalleled opportunity. The Romans never saw the barbarians at the gate as innovators, only as destroyers. Don't make the same mistake. The barbarians are coders. The new legions are decentralized networks, and the new empire is being built on a blockchain. Your task is to understand it, to adapt it, and to position yourself within its nascent walls. The death of the dollar's dominance is not the end of the world. It is the beginning of a new one. And in that new world, the only true security will not be found in a vault in Fort Knox, but in the unbreakable code of a decentralized ledger, and in the knowledge to use it.